As you may know, I have recently written a book about music. It's called What Vinyls to Own and Why. It's dedicated to the LP era, the era of the long play records between roughly 1950 and roughly 1990. From all over the world, 40 countries, over 40 years. Well, it's available on Amazon, but I still need to do some promotion, and maybe this video could serve as such. I would like to start with the first decade of the book, the decade of the 50s, and suggest you, well, the best of the best from my point of view, the best records, the best albums that the world recorded in that decade. Overall, I'm recommending about 120 albums from that era, from that decade, from the 50s and maybe a couple of years in the 40s. And when I wanted to pick maybe the best 10 of them, it was impossible, and I ended up having picked 20 best of the best albums of the 50s. A couple of words about the background of the decade, all over the world, which clearly has direct relation with the music, with the inspiration of the people. Maybe the most important event of the 50s was the death of Stalin. That was the end of probably the most terrible, the most dreadful era in the history of the civilization. The people were, well, both happy and afraid to be happy. Stalin's era was over, but communist era would go on for almost 40 years more. Although that it's not comparable. Well, what was before Stalin's death and what would be after it. Pretty different time. In Cuba, the communist empire made a strike back, having conquered the island without war. So it was also a very dramatic moment in the history of our planet, which has its consequences even today. In Argentina, it was a very difficult time, because that was the decade when the President Perón, a very ambiguous figure in the history of the country, he was overthrown. He had to go in exile, and actually that was the beginning of the very gloomy decades in the history of that beautiful country. Europe was still trying to find their way out of the World War II. So were the United States of America. The era of Eisenhower, the witch hunting, well, a lot of pretty dramatic, sometimes tragic times. In terms of music, we need to be talking only about the American records in that decade, because the rest of the world was not ready yet, was has not yet shaped the local music in its best way, which we would enjoy in the upcoming in the following decades. But that would be later. In the 50s, they were still searching. Astor Piazzolla was still searching for his Tango Nuevo. Benny Moré and Arsenio Rodriguez were still trying to shape the things to come. Well, everybody was trying to shape the things to come all over the world in the 50s. So the selection of the albums, of the best albums of the case, would be American. We need, when we are talking about the 50s, we need to be aware of two things. The beginning and the end of the decade coincide with the very, very fundamental moments in the history of music, in particular in the history of the recording of music. Because the beginning of the 50s or the end of the 40s, approximately the year 40, 48, 49, 50, that was the start of the LP era. That was when the long play format was finally introduced, and the world started to be thinking or to be creating in terms of bigger and fuller records, which would be similar to classical concerts or suites. Actually, Duke Ellington liked that idea so much that starting from the 50s, well, the most of his works were exactly suites. So LP era started with the start of the decade. And at the end of the decade, again, approximately the year 57, 58, 59, 60, that was the moment when first, we finally had a high-quality stereo and high fidelity format. High fidelity format with the stereo, that was when the music started to sound so great that we still cannot believe that it was possible back then. In the music recorded in the 58, 59, 60 and later sounds better than the music that is being recorded today. But it was not that great from the very beginning, because the very first stereo, which coincides with the decade more or less, was sometimes of such a poor quality that there is quite a big number of people today, collectors of music, who collect, well, the albums back then were written in two forms, in mono and stereo. And the people are collecting the mono version because it was recorded much better, with much better quality. The stereo version was still much rawer. That's what we need to take into account when we are talking about the decade. In terms of the genres of music, again, that would be a very, very personal take. You know that a jazz man and a rock man can go along much easier than two lovers of jazz music, because within this jazz realm, the opinions are so contradicting and so opposite sometimes that people cannot stand each other. So maybe I'm going to say things that many people aren't going to like. I would depict the decade the following way. From my point of view, yes, it really had a couple of very conceptual, very new and very cool movements in music, and bebop will not be one of them from my point of view. Charlie Parker is a genius, no doubts about that. He's genius. Dizzy Gillespie is a highly talented person, highly talented. Thelonious Monk is not. Thelonious Monk is not. But Powell, again, genius. Lenny Tristana, the same level, genius. But the music of Charlie Parker or Dizzy Gillespie, the music that is associated most of all with the era of bebop, sucks. You're not going to listen to it twice. No, it is always imposed on people. People are always made to listen to that music. People are made to think that this music is great, and it is not. Charlie Parker has formulated very, very serious things, but he hasn't been able to implement them. He hasn't left us any really solid recordings that you would want to listen over and over again. Unlike his friends, his companions, and especially people who would come later. Maybe they were not as genius as him, but they were able to develop his ideas. Sonny Stitt, for example, yeah. So that's my personal opinion about bebop and Dizzy Gillespie. Although my recommendation of those 12 best of the best from the decade of the 50s includes one clear bebop recording. There also there won't be anything from Miles Davis in the 50s, and especially from John Coltrane. John Coltrane, and well, when people are saying that I'm crazy about the music of Miles Davis, and especially I'm crazy about the music of John Coltrane, know what? They do not or have not listened to anybody else. They do not know the music of jazz. Because John Coltrane, do you want the truth about the John Coltrane's music? Accents are boring and very predictable. Accents, the improvisation. Well, he's making accents while playing. Phrasing is absolutely dull, not interesting. The sound of his saxophone, are you kidding me? It sounds like a broken plumber pipe. Have you listened to Lester Young? Have you listened to Ben Webster? Have you listened to Coleman Hawkins? Have you listened to Stan Getz, to Jerry Mulligan? And have you listened to all those people? If you have, how can you listen to John Coltrane? Explain to me. I don't understand that. I am recommending one album in my book which contains music of John Coltrane. Do you know what album is that? It's called John Coltrane and Paul Kinnishad. And I'm recommending it exactly for the people to compare two totally uncomparable saxophone players. Paul Kinnishad, who is absolutely tremendous, one of the key figures in the history of jazz music, and John Coltrane, who is one of the tremendous figures in the history of the marketing, which has nothing to do with the jazz music nor with the art. And finally, John Coltrane and Miles Davis, they are playing, well, they are two the most tremendous figures in the history of the atonal music. Do you like atonal music? Go on, listen to it whenever you want and wherever you want. I'm going to be ignoring it, and I have my reasons for that, because atonal music is not music. Well, this style, this is trademark style of Miles Davis. You can talk about it only if you haven't heard Sweets Edison, John Newman, and actually Chet Baker started developing his own very cool trumpet more or less in the same years, maybe just a little bit later than Miles Davis, but pretty independently. So it's not his thing. The cool trumpet, which Miles Davis is known for and associated with, is not his thing. But the true great project of the decades were, from my point of view, were two great quartets. Modern jazz quartet, an African one, and a white one from San Francisco, Dave Brubeck's quartet. These are truly revolutionary and truly great projects of the decade. They would record much better albums in the 60s, just because the technical quality would be higher in the upcoming decade, but chronologically they belong to the decade of the 50s. Well, and I would prefer people associating the decade with MJQ and Dave Brubeck's guys, much more than with Miles Davis and John Coltrane. Okay, so also that was the decade when well, swing music was over. The swing music didn't survive the World War II. Couldn't, with the death of Glenn Miller and so on. So bebop was suggested, but it was not the thing. People didn't care about bebop, and they started to look for different things because, well, there cannot be any emptiness on such a interesting, with the market of such a great potential as music. And the lonely housewives who had to spend now more time alone at home, having nothing to do. After the World War II, their husbands were earning money enough to sustain the whole family. And the housewives didn't have anything to do but to participate in the hit parades on the radio, and eventually a figure like Elvis Presley started to be leading in the hit parades all over the country, which brought the music lovers into despair, because that was impossible. Well, they were the whole world was being ruined in front of their eyes. It was impossible for the world after the epoch of the swing and all the jazz that we had just one decade, several years before, and now Elvis Presley. Sorry, that was a catastrophe, and it was such indeed. Many people turned 40 and 50. From my point of view, that's the most interesting phase of anybody's career. Like Louis Armstrong, for example, like Duke Ellington, like Count Basie. Logically, that was a decade when they had great records. Duke Ellington stalled for a while, but still had at least one unforgettable album. And that was, sadly, that was the decade when we lost a number of epic figures like Lester Young, like Billie Holiday, like Art Tatum, like Charlie Parker. That was the end of a whole era. Actually, it was much a bigger borderline between two epochs than the line between, say, 19th century and 20th century. From many points of view, the 19th century ended after the World War II, and from that moment on we had a totally different epoch. Okay, that's what the decade was about. Now, 20 best albums from the 50s from my point of view. Number one would be Lester Young with the Oscar Peterson Trio, recorded in 1952. For Lester, that was already the decade of when his health declined. He became even more fragile, but that fragility of his was something that contributed to his particular, very romantic, very tender way of playing greatly, and that's why all the albums of Lester Young of that later period well, are must thing for any collector, especially an album where he is accompanied by the best, by the very best people in the house, Oscar Peterson and his trio. In 2 years, 1954, Sarah Vaughan recorded her immortal eponymous album, which is loved by everybody, which sounds a little bit, I would say, even like, well, the recording is not ideal at all, but still loved by everybody. It has a very big degree of genuineness. In it, the, well, Lullaby of Berlin, that would be the number one on the disc, loved by everybody. Maybe the best tune Sarah Vaughan ever recorded. And musicians are great too. Among them, the already mentioned Paul Kinnishett in particular. Billie Holiday had a number of great, although she was even more fragile and even in a worse health than Lester Young, her friend, in the same decade, but still she managed to leave us at least 3 totally great, totally classic albums. Personally, I incline to the live concert in Europe, in Basel in particular, that she recorded in the same year, 1954. Buddy DeFranco and Red Norvo are among the people who shine the most brightly as her people who accompany her on those concerts. She does a very different versions of All of Me, Lover Come Back to Me. They are absolutely unique and absolutely unforgettable, and the level of inspiration is incredible on those concerts, despite her condition, her fragile condition. The CD also includes a couple of it also includes tracks from her concert from Copenhagen, from the same tour, but the vinyl version has only the basal part. Totally great. Louis Armstrong and his Starts recorded an album known as Ambassador Satch in the year 1955, and it contains, again, that's an European tour in Milan in particular, and it contains the best of the best tunes Louis Armstrong is known for, in particular in my country. Well, back then that was a country with a stupid name, a Soviet Union, and even stupider abbreviation USSR. Although you should know, we never were Soviet Union. We never were USSR. We always were Ukraine. That was some stupid time, very gloomy, very terrible time when somebody called our great Ukrainian land part of some bullshit known as Soviet Union and USSR. You should know that that's our attitude to those times. We have been Ukraine always. And USSR and Soviet Union means nothing in our history, only bad things. But in those bad times, they still somehow were able to produce great compilations of the Western artists like Louis Armstrong on our Soviet label known as Melodia, and the most popular tunes on those compilations were exactly from that Ambassador Satch album. Also, there is one of his best of the best maybe tunes, Make the Knife, everybody knows that version. Also recorded during that European tour in the same year, but it was issued only on a small 7-inch separate disc. Take that into account too. Modern Jazz Quartet in 1955 produced an album, one of their classical albums known as Concord. Again, it's great, it's classical, it's the tune is one of among the best the group ever had. But again, in a couple of years they would be recording technically more perfect albums with the same repertory once in a while. But again, for a collector, that would be a totally great thing to find an album like that, especially in a good condition. Lenny Tristano is seldom, no, the true expert of jazz music know that he does belong to the bebop era, but he's mentioned much more seldom than, for example, Thelonious Monk or Bud Powell as a bebop player, although he might be the main bebopper of all times. For those who are newbies to jazz music, Lenny Tristano was a white guy, but he was blind, but of incredibly great technique. He was a piano player and revolutionary mind. So this again eponymous album that bears the same name, Lenny Tristano, 1955, is split into two parts. The first part is absolutely incredible, and that's exactly what Lenny is known for in the history of music. The second part is a live session with Lee Konitz in New York. It's good, it's great, but it's not as great as at the first sight. Also, you should know that 3 years before that, in 1952, he issued a 7-inch EP, small disc, with 2 tunes, and when I listened to them for the first time, I thought that I was about to go insane, because it was simply impossible. It was simply impossible. You can lose your mind. You can lose your mind when you listen to them. But thankfully, I understood that was overdubbing. Yeah, he did. That was the first experiments of overdubbing, and if it wasn't, I would go insane. But with overdubbing, it was possible. It was understandable, and the album I'm talking about gives you exactly the same vibes than that unbelievable small disc. Again, Lenny Tristano, 1955. Art Tatum needs to be collected. Well, all the works of Art Tatum are of absolute value. First, because he died very long ago, in the same decade of the 50s, in 1956, if I'm not mistaken. And that's maybe the best piano player in the history of jazz music, in the history of music. And one year before his death, he produced an album within a quartet. Him, Roy Eldridge, and John Simmons and Elvin Stoller, right? Absolutely great, which proves you that Art Tatum was not only about technique, but also that was a very great jazz mind, one of the greatest in the history. Well, you're going to enjoy it greatly, and the album cover is also considered to be among the most classical ones. What about the big bands? The big bands were, the era was over, the swing era was over. Glenn Miller, Artie Shaw, Benny Goodman, Dorsey Brothers, that was over definitely. Woody Herman went on, Buddy Rich went on, but the main were, of course, the main bands were those of Count Basie and Duke Ellington. Duke Ellington was not as particularly remarkable in the decade as Count Basie, who finally found his top sound. And the guy responsible for it is known as Neil Hefti, his best arranger. But the albums I'm going to talk about now, that's his live concert at Newport, in the Jazz Festival in Newport, 1957, which is maybe one of the best, or maybe even the best album of Count Basie of all times. The inspiration is absolutely incredible, and the people, the Basie people, they are known to be the best people in the history of jazz music. But Count Basie, in the same year, 1957, he managed to produce two historical super albums. One of them, this live session from the Newport, and the other one is his the best known and the most respected work, known as Atomic Basie, and that's exactly where Neil Hefti stepped in as arranger. He is known as, he comes from himself from the orchestra of Woody Herman, and he is known to be able to write such difficult arrangements that Count Basie's orchestra were the only people capable of doing that, of playing that music. Anybody else was not. So, and Atomic Basie is one of the best examples of such arrangement. For example, Splanky, one of the best, and it was written by Neil Hefti in particular. Ella Fitzgerald did a lot of work in the 50s, a lot of great work, incredible work, unbelievable. From my point of view, her best work of the 50s was recorded live in Chicago in the local opera house, and it contains a number of tunes like "It's All Right with Me" or "Goody Goody" or "Ill Wind," which are maybe among the 5 best tunes she ever recorded. In a couple of days she would repeat the same concert in Los Angeles, and it was recorded as well. It was issued on a CD, but it's uncomparable with her with the quality that she produced in Chicago. The name that I admire so much, Frank Grillo, better known as Machito, Cuban, leader of a big band, of Afro-Cuban big band, one of a kind. There haven't been anything like that, neither before Machito nor after him. Absolutely unique. He had 2 groundbreaking albums, one of them in 1957, it's called Kenya, and it was followed the next year with another gem of the same splendor. The name responsible for the arrangement is A.K. Salim, a little known guy of immense talent who had a couple of albums of his own in the 50s, also pretty great. But what he did on the album of Machito is totally historical. The orchestra includes people like Cannonball Adderley or John Newman, and you can imagine how great it is. It includes such tunes as Congo Mulense or Tintindeo or Minor Rama. known to everybody. The best one in the genre, that style, Ring a Leve, would follow on that next album that would be produced the next year. So Machito is a gem. Duke Ellington simply didn't have a right to ignore the success of Count Basie at the festival at Newport, and the next year, 1958, he responded with a live recording of his band, again at the festival, jazz festival at Newport. That was one of the best festivals editions ever. Jazz on a Summer Day, that's the name of a documentary dedicated to that jazz festival at Newport in 1958. You can see a lot of great people there, but the main star of the event was definitely Duke Ellington and his band. It's classical. Well, everybody should know those numbers by heart. In particular, one of them includes a duel on baritone saxophones between Harry Carney, the Ellingtonian man, and Jerry Mulligan, the invited guest. Unforgettable, totally unforgettable. Louis Armstrong again, the year 1958, with his immortal good book, selection of gospels, known to everybody, like Go Down Moses or Down by the Riverside. Everybody admires this work, but people need to remember that Louis Armstrong is not the only person responsible for this beauty, but we need to take into account the name of Cy Oliver, not only a great arranger but also a leader of a choir of his own. The choir is a very bright addition to this beautiful album, also unforgettable. Now, the promised the best bebop albums of all time. That would be Bud Powell's The Scene Changes in 1958. His health was pretty declined, but from time to time he still had very bright moments, and during one of them, this incredibly great album was recorded. That is what bebop was about, not what Charlie Parker or Dizzy Gillespie or especially Thelonious Monk recorded, but this album of Bud Powell is exactly what the bebop was from the very birth. That was exactly how it was conceived. Louis Armstrong and Ella Fitzgerald in 1959 with Porgy and Bess, the famous jazz opera of George Gershwin. Everybody loves it. There's no need to talk much about it. Just remember, Russell Garcia was the guy who arranged it and conducted the orchestra. In the same year, 1959, Chet Baker produced one of the most beautiful albums, which is called simply Chet, and many people think it's maybe the best album of Baker of all times. I can agree only that it was the best from his very first part. It was very part of his career. It was a very difficult part of his career. He started doing drugs. He lost his friend Twardzik, and that happened before that famous or notorious incident with his teeth, with his broken teeth, which almost ruined his career. But that was still, all of that was still ahead. By the year 1959, that was definitely the best work of Chet Baker. Johnny Hodges and Duke Ellington back to back, also 1959. One of the best albums ever, But you remember that back to back on this album, that was not Duke Ellington and should be not Duke Ellington and Johnny Hodges, but Johnny Hodges and Sweets Edison. That's the guy who is responsible for the beauty of that album. Duke Ellington rather he participates, but he is not as bright as Sweets Edison and Johnny Hodges on that album. It's the album. This album should bear the name of Sweets Edison. Dave Brubeck Quartet, his revolutionary album of 1959, totally great, totally incredible. The only thing that we can regret is that those experiments with the unsquare rhythms ended so quickly. That was a couple of experiments of Brubeck, couple of experiments of Don Ellis Orchestra with Milcho Liviev, and that's all. Jazz music couldn't cope with the unsquare rhythms, which are folkloric in Bulgaria and which are, well, for example, 5 beats per bar is a folkloric standard for South America as well. But for jazz music, it was too difficult. Jerry Mulligan's Quartet, what is there to say, 1959. It contains Festive Minor. From my point of view, Festive Minor is maybe the best post-war jazz tune ever, because it has everything. It's this album and this tune in particular are more they relate to the genre of cool much more than the Birth of Cool itself. The project, you remember that project of Miles Davis, which was also conceived by Jerry Mulligan. But from my point of view, this work relates and describes and depicts and has the soul of cool to a much better, higher degree than the Birth of Cool itself. Totally incredible and unforgettable album. And the last one would be Anita O'Day with Billy May singing the tunes of Cole Porter in 1959. That was the beginning of a series of records by Anita O'Day, all of them very historical, all of them very great, and all of them fortunately before she was too much into drugs and alcohol, and actually her career would soon be ruined. But she had that bright moment with Billy May, who was the ex-arranger of Glenn Miller, and the album of the 1959 is well, among the best of the decade. I recommend it to you very much. So that's it. Those were the 20 best of the best music albums of the 50s from the book What Vinyls to Own and Why. That's the Ukrainian project. All this knowledge comes from Ukraine. I would love to listen, to hear the alternative version of the best albums from the same decade. If there are people who would like to share, I would be really thankful. Thank you very much.